Kethvar Zaltheron stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council building. The walls were made of white stone that glowed softly in the dim light. He had been called here for a special meeting, but he did not know why. As a middle-level worker in the Zilanian Intelligence Department, he rarely got called to such important places. The Zilanians were known across the galaxy for their smart minds and careful thinking. They did not act without planning everything first. They used math and science to solve problems, not emotions or feelings. Kethvar was very good at studying other species and understanding how they behaved. This skill had made him useful to his government. A tall figure walked toward him. It was High Commander Veltar, one of the most important Zilanian leaders. His blue skin was darker than Kethvar's, showing his high rank and many years of service. Analyst Zaltheron, the commander said in their formal language. "You have been chosen for a very important task." Kethvar bowed his head in respect. "I am ready to serve, High Commander." The commander touched a device on his wrist. A three-dimensional image appeared in the air between them. It showed a small planet with 2 moons. "This is Haven's Edge, a human mining colony near the border of Hegemony space." Kethvar knew about the Hegemony Coalition. They were 4 old alien races that had joined together to control large parts of the galaxy. They were known for being violent and taking what they wanted by force. The Galactic Council had been trying to keep peace with them for many years, but it was getting harder. "The humans," the commander continued, "are still new to our council. They only joined us 3 years ago when they learned how to travel faster than light. We know very little about how they fight wars." The image changed to show human soldiers in their strange armor. Kethvar had seen pictures of humans before, but he still found them odd to look at. They had only 2 arms and 2 legs, and their skin had no scales or protective covering. They seemed so weak compared to most other species in the galaxy. "Your job," the commander said, "is to go to this human military base and watch them. Study how they fight. Learn about their tactics and weapons. We need to know if they can help defend Council space against the hegemony." Kethvar understood, but he sensed there was more to this mission. "What am I really looking for, High Commander?" The older Zilanian was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke more softly. "The humans worry some of our leaders. They are emotional and unpredictable. They make decisions based on feelings instead of logic. We need to know if they will be good allies or if they might become a problem." This made sense to Kethvar. The Galactic Council had rules and order. Every species had their place and role. Humans had not learned these rules yet. They still acted like they were the only intelligent life in the universe. "You will be sent as an official observer," the commander explained. "The humans have agreed to let council members watch their military training. They think it will help build trust between our peoples." Kethvar nodded. This was a common practice when new species joined the council. "How long will I be there?" "As long as needed. There are reports that hegemony ships have been seen near human space. If there is going to be fighting, we need you there to see how humans handle real battle." The thought of seeing actual combat made Kethvar nervous. Zilanians preferred to avoid violence when possible. They used their technology and intelligence to solve conflicts before they became wars, but humans seemed to enjoy fighting. Their history was full of wars between their own people. "I will prepare for departure immediately," Kethvar said. The commander handed him a small data device. "This contains all the information we have about human military organization. Study it on your journey. Remember, you are there to watch and learn, not to fight. Your safety is important, but your mission is more important." As Kethvar left the Great Hall, he felt both excited and worried. This was the biggest assignment of his career. If he did well, it could lead to promotion and more important work. If he failed, it could end his career in intelligence. He spent the next 3 days preparing for the journey. He studied human language, culture, and military history. What he learned surprised him. Humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years, but they had also created beautiful art, music, and literature. They seemed to be 2 different species in one body. Their military tactics were strange. They often chose to fight even when the smart choice would be to retreat. They would risk many lives to save just one person. They made decisions that seemed to ignore basic logic and math. But they had also survived on a dangerous planet and spread across many worlds in just a few hundred years. They had built powerful weapons and fast ships. There was something about them that worked, even if Zilanians could not understand it. The journey to Haven's Edge took 12 days in a fast council ship. Kethvar used the time to practice speaking human languages. He chose to learn English, which seemed to be their most common tongue. The sounds were hard for his throat to make, but he managed well enough. When the ship finally reached Haven's edge, Kethvar was amazed by what he saw. The planet was covered in huge machines that dug deep into the ground. Flying vehicles moved constantly between the mining sites and the spaceport. Everything looked busy and loud and chaotic. The human military base was built on a hill overlooking the main mining complex. It was surrounded by walls and weapon towers. Ships landed and took off from a large landing area. Soldiers marched in formations across training fields. As Kethvar's ship landed, he saw human soldiers waiting for him. They wore green and brown uniforms that would help them hide in forests. Their faces were covered by helmets with dark glass over their eyes. Each one carried a weapon that looked much more advanced than Kethvar had expected. A woman stepped forward as he left his ship. She removed her helmet, showing a face with dark skin and short black hair. One of her eyes was artificial, made of metal and glass. Scars on her cheek showed she had been in battles before. "Welcome to Haven's Edge," she said in clear English. "I am Commander Sarah Chen. I will be your host during your stay here." Kethvar tried to speak English back to her. "Thank you, Commander. I am Analyst Kethvar Zaltheron. I look forward to learning about your military." The commander smiled, showing white teeth. This was a human expression of friendliness, though it looked threatening to Kethvar. Showing teeth was a sign of aggression among his people. "We have prepared quarters for you in our guest building," she said. "Tomorrow morning I will introduce you to my unit. We are the 7th Reconnaissance Battalion. We specialize in scouting and quick strikes against enemy forces." As they walked toward the base, Kethvar noticed how the human soldiers looked at him. Some seemed curious, others suspicious. A few smiled and nodded in greeting. Their emotions were so easy to read on their faces. Zelanians had learned to hide their feelings long ago. "Tell me, Commander," Kethvar said as they walked. "What do you think of having an observer from the Council?" Commander Chen was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I think it's smart. We humans are new to this galactic community. We have a lot to learn about working with other species. But I also think we have things to teach, or something humans understand very well." This answer worried Kethvar. Humans seemed proud of their ability to fight. Most civilized species saw war as a failure of diplomacy, but humans talked about it like it was an art form. That night, alone in his small room, Kethvar began writing his first report. He described the military base, the soldiers he had met, and his initial impressions of human military culture. Everything seemed organized, but there was an energy he could not understand. It was like being near a powerful machine that could explode at any moment. He did not know it yet, but his comfortable worldview was about to be challenged in ways he could never imagine. The next morning came too early for Kethvar. Human days were shorter than Zelanian days, and their sun was brighter than he was used to. Commander Chen met him at the guest building wearing combat gear and carrying her weapon. "Ready to meet the team?" she asked. Kethvar followed her across the base. Everywhere he looked, humans were busy with different tasks. Some cleaned weapons, others studied maps, and groups practiced fighting moves together. The noise was constant. Humans seemed to need to talk much more than other species. They stopped at a large building where soldiers were eating their morning meal. The smell was strange to Kethvar. Humans ate cooked food that had many different scents mixed together. His own people ate simple nutrition blocks that had no smell at all. "Attention," Commander Chen called out. The talking stopped and all the soldiers stood up straight. "I want you to meet our observer from the Galactic Council. This is Analyst Kethvar Zaltheron from the Zelanian Diplomatic Corps." A large human with dark skin and muscles that bulged under his uniform stepped forward. "Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, sir. We call him Tank because nothing stops him when he starts moving." The sergeant smiled and held out his hand. Kethvar had read about this human custom of shaking hands. He reached out carefully and was surprised by how strong the human's grip was. "Welcome to our little corner of hell," Tank said with a laugh. "Hope you brought your dancing shoes because the hegemony boys have been getting frisky lately." Kethvar did not understand what dancing shoes had to do with military operations, but he nodded politely. A smaller human approached next. She was young and moved very quietly. "Private Yuki Tanaka," she said. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "I handle communications and electronic warfare." "And I'm Corporal Liu Wei," said another soldier. He was tall and thin with careful movements. "Sniper and forward observer. I read a lot of poetry in my spare time." This surprised Kethvar. A sniper was a soldier who killed enemies from far away. Poetry was art about emotions and beauty. How could the same person do both? The last human to introduce herself was older than the others. She had gray in her hair and gentle eyes. Dr. Elena Vasquez, combat medic. I patch up the holes these idiots put in themselves. The soldiers laughed at this. Kethvar was confused by their friendship. In Zelanian military units, there were clear ranks and formal relationships. These humans seemed to joke with each other like family members. The doc saves our lives on a regular basis, Tank explained. She's pulled more soldiers out of bad situations than anyone else in the battalion. Dr. Vasquez waved away the praise. Just doing my job. Someone has to keep you boys and girls in one piece. Commander Chen led them outside to a training area. We have exercises planned for today. Nothing too exciting, but it will give you a chance to see how we operate. The first exercise was weapons training. Kethvar watched as the humans practiced with different guns and explosives. They were much more skilled than he had expected. Private Tanaka could hit tiny targets from very far away. Tank could carry weapons that weighed more than some entire Zelanian soldiers. But what struck Kethvar most was how they worked together. They communicated with hand signals and small sounds. They seemed to know where each other would be without talking about it. When one person moved, the others adjusted their positions automatically. How long have you trained together? He asked Commander Chen. This particular group? About 2 years. But some of them have served together longer. Trust takes time to build trust. Kethvar made a note about this. Zelanians relied on protocols and procedures. They followed orders because that was the logical thing to do. These humans seemed to follow orders because they trusted the person giving them. In the afternoon, they practiced medical training. Kethvar watched Dr. Vasquez teach soldiers how to treat wounds and injuries. The humans practiced on fake bodies that looked very real. Some of the injuries were terrible to see. In combat, the doctor explained, you might be the only medical help your teammate has. You need to know how to stop bleeding, treat shock, and get them to safety. One young soldier asked, what if the injury is too bad? What if there's nothing we can do? Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Then you stay with them. You hold their hand and talk to them. You make sure they don't die alone. Kethvar felt something strange in his chest. Among his people, death was simply a biological process. It was sad but logical. But these humans seemed to think there was something sacred about the moment of death. That evening, Commander Chen invited him to join the soldiers for their meal. They sat around a table and shared food from the same containers. They told stories about past missions and made jokes about their officers. So what do you think of us so far? Tank asked Kethvar. Kethvar was careful with his words. You are more organized than I expected. Your training is quite advanced. That's it? Liu Wei laughed. Come on, you can be honest. I bet your people think we're crazy barbarians who solve everything by shooting it. The direct question surprised Kethvar. There is some truth to that opinion, he admitted. The humans laughed instead of getting angry. This was very strange behavior. Fair enough, Tank said. We probably do shoot at things more than we should. But sometimes shooting is the only language bullies understand. Bullies? Kethvar asked. The Hegemony Coalition, Commander Chen explained. They take what they want and hurt anyone who gets in their way. Diplomacy doesn't work with people like that, Private Tanaka spoke up. My grandparents lived through wars on Earth. They always said that sometimes good people have to fight to protect innocent people. It's not about wanting to fight. It's about being willing to fight when you have to. Kethvar thought about this. Zelanian philosophy taught that violence was always the worst solution to any problem. But these humans seemed to think that avoiding violence could sometimes be worse than fighting. Late that night, he could not sleep. He walked outside and found Liu Wei sitting alone, looking up at the stars. Can't sleep either, the corporal asked. Your planet's day cycle is different from mine, Kethvar said. Mine too, actually. I grew up on a space station. Never really got used to natural light cycles. Liu Wei was quiet for a moment. Mind if I ask you something? Of course. What do your people think is going to happen out here? With the hegemony, I mean. Kethvar considered his answer carefully. My government hopes that diplomatic solutions can be found. War is expensive and wasteful. But what do you think? Not your government. You. No one had ever asked Kethvar for his personal opinion about political matters. Among Zelanians, personal opinions were less important than official positions. I think, he said slowly, that the hegemony will eventually test our resolve. They want to see if the council will fight to protect its members. Liu Wei nodded. That's what we think too. And when that test comes, it's probably going to happen here. We're the closest human colony to their space. Are you afraid? Kethavar asked. The human was quiet for a long time. Yeah, sometimes. But not of dying. I'm afraid of letting people down. I'm afraid of not being brave enough when it matters. This answer confused Kethavar completely. How could someone be more afraid of cowardice than death? The next few days passed quickly. Kethavar watched the humans train in different situations. They practiced fighting in buildings, in forests, and in open areas. They learned how to use captured enemy weapons and how to fight when their own equipment broke. But he also saw them during their free time. They played games and music together. They shared pictures of their families back on Earth and other human worlds. They took care of each other when someone got sick or injured during training. Slowly, Kethavar began to understand something important. These humans were not just soldiers following orders. They were friends who had chosen to fight together. Their strength did not come from their weapons or their training. It came from their relationships with each other. This was a completely new idea for him. Solanian military units were efficient because everyone did their assigned job correctly. Human military units seemed to be effective because everyone cared about protecting the others. He was still trying to understand this when the alarms began ringing across the base. Commander Chen's voice came over the communication system. All units to battle stations. We have multiple hegemony ships approaching the system. This is not a drill. Kethavar felt his heart beat faster. He was about to see humans in real combat. He had no idea that what he was about to witness would change him forever. The base transformed in minutes. The laughing, joking humans Kethavar had been watching suddenly became focused and deadly serious. Soldiers ran to their positions carrying weapons and equipment. Officers shouted orders while looking at computer screens showing the approaching enemy ships. Kethavar followed Commander Chen to the command center. The room was full of blinking lights and display screens. Officers sat at control stations talking rapidly into their communication devices. The main screen showed red dots moving toward the planet. Report, Commander Chen ordered. 12 hegemony warships, replied a young officer. 3 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, and 3 troop transport ships. They'll be in weapons range in 4 hours. Kethavar felt cold fear in his stomach. 12 warships against 1 small military base. The logical response would be to evacuate immediately, but the humans were not evacuating. What about council reinforcements? Chen asked. The nearest council fleet is 16 days away, the officer replied. 16 days. Kethavar did quick calculations in his head. The hegemony forces could destroy this entire base in less than 1 day. There were 3,000 human soldiers here against what would probably be 50,000 enemy troops. Ma'am, another officer spoke up. We're receiving a transmission from the hegemony fleet commander. Put it on the main screen, Chen ordered. The screen changed to show a hegemony officer. He belonged to the Krek species with gray skin and 4 arms. His uniform showed high rank and his eyes were cold and cruel. Human commander, the alien said. I am war leader Thax of the Hegemony Coalition. You will surrender your base and all mining operations to Hegemony control. You have 1 hour to decide. Commander Chen stepped forward. This is Commander Sarah Chen of the United Earth Forces. Haven's Edge is a legally recognized colony under Galactic Council protection. You have no authority here. The Kreks laughed, a harsh sound like metal scraping stone. The Council is weak and far away, human. We take what we want. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Counteroffer, Chen replied calmly. Turn your ships around and leave our space. Do that and we won't destroy them. The alien's 4 eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. You dare threaten us? We have 12 warships and 50,000 soldiers. You have nothing. We have something you don't understand, Chen said. We have humans, the transmission ended. Kethavar stared at Commander Chen in shock. She had just threatened a vastly superior enemy force. It was either the bravest thing he had ever seen or the most foolish. Commander, he said carefully, you cannot seriously intend to fight. The odds are impossible. Chen turned to look at him. Her artificial eye glowed softly in the dim light. Analyst Kethavar, let me explain something about humans. We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because some things are worth fighting for. But you will all die, Kethavar said. Maybe, she replied. But we'll make it cost them everything they have. And other people will hear about what happened here. They'll know that humans don't give up. The next few hours were like watching organized chaos. The humans prepared their base for siege. They moved civilians into underground shelters that had been built inside old mining tunnels. They set up weapons positions and created barriers using mining equipment. Cathvar watched Tank and his heavy weapons team position huge guns that could shoot down aircraft. Private Tanaka worked with other soldiers to set up communication networks that would work even if the main systems were destroyed. Liu Wei studied maps of the surrounding area, planning sniper positions. Dr. Vasquez organized medical stations throughout the base. She moved supplies and trained more soldiers in emergency medical care. When Kethavar asked why she was not evacuating with the civilians, she looked at him like he had said something very strange. "These soldiers are my responsibility," she said. "I'm not leaving them." "But you are not a combat soldier," Kethavar pointed out. "You could help more people by staying alive." The doctor stopped working and looked directly at him. "Son, I've been patching up soldiers for 20 years. I've learned something important. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone is the knowledge that they're not alone." Kethavar did not understand, but he could see that arguing would be useless. As the hegemony ships came closer, the humans made their final preparations. Kethavar expected panic or fear, but instead he saw something else. The soldiers were calm and determined. They checked their equipment one more time, said goodbye to friends, and took their positions. Commander Chen called a brief meeting of all unit leaders. Kethavar was allowed to observe from the back of the room. "Listen up," she said. "We all know the situation. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and there's no cavalry coming to save us. But we have 40,000 civilians in those shelters who are counting on us to keep them alive." She paused and looked around the room. "I'm not going to lie to you. Most of us probably won't survive this. But we're going to make the hegemony pay such a high price for this rock that they'll think twice before attacking another human world." Tank raised his hand. "What about evacuation, ma'am? We could get some people out." "Not 40,000 people," Chen replied. "Not in time. And even if we could, where would they go? This is their home. These are their minds, their schools, their lives. Someone has to make a stand." Liu Wei spoke up. "The hegemony will use this attack as propaganda. They'll say humans are weak and easily conquered." "Not if we make it expensive enough," Chen said. "Not if we show them what happens when you attack human civilians." The meeting ended and soldiers returned to their positions. Kethavar followed Commander Chen to the main defensive wall. The sun was setting, painting the sky red and orange. In the distance they could see lights in the sky as the enemy ships prepared to land. "Commander," Kethavar said, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Sure. Do you have family? Children?" Chen was quiet for a moment. "I have a daughter. She's 8 years old, living with her father on Earth. I send her messages when I can." "And you are willing to die here knowing you will never see her again?" The commander looked at him with sad eyes. "I'm willing to die here so that she grows up in a galaxy where bullies don't always win, so that when someone threatens innocent people, there are others willing to stand up and fight." Kethavar felt something break inside his chest. Among his people, individual sacrifice for abstract concepts was considered a mental illness. But looking at this human woman who was preparing to die for strangers and principles, he could not see illness. He saw something that his analytical mind had no words for. The first explosions came just after midnight. Hegemony ships began bombing the outer edges of the base. The humans had expected this and were ready. Most of their important equipment was underground or in reinforced bunkers. Kethavar found himself in a command bunker 50 feet below the surface. Computer screens showed the battle developing above. Red dots marked enemy landing sites. Blue dots showed human defensive positions. "First wave incoming," reported a communications officer. "Estimate 2,000 troops, mainly Krek shock infantry." Commander Chen studied the displays. "Let them come. We'll give them a warm welcome." Through the screens, Kethavar watched his first human battle. The enemy soldiers advanced across open ground toward the human defensive lines. Hidden weapons positions opened fire, creating deadly crossfires that cut down dozens of attackers. But the hegemony forces kept coming. For every soldier that fell, 2 more took his place. Slowly they began to reach the outer defensive walls. "Activating mining charges," Tank's voice came over the radio. "Everyone stay down." Huge explosions shook the ground. The humans had placed mining explosives under the approaches to their base. Hundreds of enemy soldiers disappeared in clouds of dirt and fire. But still they kept coming. They're brave. I'll give them that. Liu Wei's voice crackled over the radio from his sniper position. No, Commander Chen replied. They're not brave. They're following orders. There's a difference. Kethavar thought about this as he watched the battle. The hegemony soldiers advanced because their officers told them to. They died because their commanders considered them expendable. But the humans fought because they chose to. They risked their lives because they believed in something. The battle continued through the night. Wave after wave of enemy soldiers attacked the human positions. The humans gave ground slowly, making the enemy pay for every meter. Bodies piled up in front of the defensive walls. By morning, the outer perimeter had fallen. The humans pulled back to their second line of defense, closer to the civilian shelters. They had lost 300 soldiers, but the enemy had lost over 2,000. Not bad for the first night, Tank said when he reported to the command bunker. His armor was burned and his face was covered in dirt, but he was still smiling. How are the men holding up? Chen asked. Good spirits, ma'am. The boys and girls are angry now. Nothing makes a human fight better than seeing friends get hurt. Kethavar realized that Tank was right. The humans were not getting weaker as they took casualties. They were getting more determined. It was completely opposite to what military logic said should happen. As the second day began, Kethavar understood that he was witnessing something that would change him forever. These humans were not just fighting a battle. The second day brought worse attacks. The hegemony forces had learned from their first assault and changed their tactics. Instead of direct attacks, they used artillery to pound the human positions from far away. The constant explosions made the ground shake and filled the air with dust and smoke. Kethavar stayed in the command bunker, watching the battle through cameras and sensors. But he could hear everything. The sound of explosions, the crack of weapons fire, and sometimes the screams of wounded soldiers carried through the thick walls. Medical teams to Sector 7, Dr. Vasquez's voice came over the radio. We have multiple casualties. Commander Chen studied the tactical displays. The blue dots representing human positions were slowly being pushed back toward the center of the base. How many wounded? She asked. 63 in the last hour, came the reply. But Doc Vasquez and her teams are keeping most of them in the fight. Kethavar could not understand this. Among his people, wounded soldiers would be evacuated to safe areas for proper medical care. But these humans were patching up injuries and sending soldiers back into battle. Is that wise? He asked Commander Chen. Wounded soldiers are less effective. Chen looked at him with tired eyes. Analyst, we don't have enough healthy soldiers to replace the wounded ones. Everyone who can hold a weapon needs to be on the line. Through the camera feeds, Kethavar watched human soldiers with bandaged arms and legs taking positions alongside their unwounded comrades. Some could barely walk, but they still carried weapons and watched for enemies. Liu Wei's voice crackled over the radio. Sniper team to command. I count at least 5,000 enemy troops forming up for another assault. They're bringing heavy armor this time. Can you slow them down? Chen asked. Already working on it, ma'am, but I'm running low on ammunition. All sniper teams share ammunition with Liu Wei's position, Chen ordered. He's got the best angle on their formation. Kethavar watched the tactical display as small blue dots moved across the battlefield. Human soldiers were risking their lives to carry ammunition to Liu Wei's sniper nest. 3 of them were killed by enemy fire during the dangerous journey. But they kept coming until Liu Wei had enough bullets to continue fighting. Why do they do that? Kethavar asked. Those soldiers died just to bring ammunition to one position. Because Liu Wei can kill more enemies from that position than anywhere else, Chen explained. And because he's their friend. Humans take care of their friends. The enemy assault came in the afternoon. Thousands of hegemony soldiers supported by armored vehicles attacked the human lines simultaneously. The fighting was more intense than anything Kethavar had ever imagined. He watched Tank's heavy weapons team destroy enemy vehicles one by one, even as enemy fire rained down around them. Private Tanaka coordinated artillery strikes that broke up enemy formations. All across the defensive line, humans fought with desperate courage. But there were too many enemies. The second defensive line began to crack under the pressure. Sector 4 is falling back, reported a unit leader. We can't hold this position. Sector 6 has been overrun, came another report. Enemy forces are behind our lines. Commander Chen made a decision that shocked Kethavar. All units fall back to the final perimeter. Activate the mining tunnel charges. Huge explosions rocked the base as the humans collapsed their own mining tunnels. The powerful blasts killed hundreds of enemy soldiers who had advanced into the abandoned positions. But they also cut off any chance for the humans to retreat further. "You just trapped your own forces," Kethvar said in horror. "That's the idea," Chen replied calmly. "Now the hegemony knows we're not running away. They have to come through us to get to the civilians." The final perimeter was a circle of fortifications around the entrance to the civilian shelters. Less than 800 human soldiers were left alive, and many of them were wounded. They faced more than 30,000 enemy troops. But something strange happened as the humans took their final positions. Instead of despair, Kethvar saw determination. Instead of fear, he saw anger. These soldiers knew they were going to die, but they were not giving up. Dr. Vasquez set up her medical station right behind the fighting positions. She refused to go into the underground shelters with the civilians. "My place is with the soldiers," she told Kethvar when he suggested she should take cover. "They need to know that someone will take care of them if they get hurt." "But you will probably die here," he said. The doctor smiled sadly. "Son, we're all going to die here. The question is whether we die like heroes or like cowards." As night fell, the enemy prepared for what everyone knew would be the final assault. Kethvar found himself given a weapon by one of the human soldiers. "Just in case," the soldier said. "Might need all the help we can get." Kethvar had never held a weapon before. His people solved problems with words and mathematics, not violence. But looking at the determined faces around him, he understood that sometimes mathematics was not enough. Liu Wei appeared at the command post, his sniper rifle across his back. "Ran out of targets I can hit from long range," he said. "Figured I'd join the party down here. How many did you get?" Tank asked. "Stopped counting at 200, Liu Wei replied. But that barely made a dent in their numbers. Private Tanaka was working frantically at her communication equipment. "I'm trying to get a message out," she explained to Kethvar. "Someone needs to know what happened here. Someone needs to tell the story." "What story?" he asked. The young soldier looked at him with serious eyes. "That humans don't surrender. That when innocent people are threatened, humans will fight to the last person. That we're not afraid of bullies, no matter how big they are." The final attack began just before dawn. Wave after wave of enemy soldiers threw themselves at the human positions. The fighting was so close that soldiers used knives and bare hands when they ran out of ammunition. Kethvar found himself pulled into the battle. When a wounded human soldier fell beside him, he picked up the man's weapon and started shooting at the advancing enemies. His analytical mind noted that he was violating every principle of his peaceful culture. But he could not stop himself. Tank held one position alone for over an hour, using a massive machine gun to cut down dozens of attackers. When the gun finally broke, he fought with a metal bar torn from the fortifications. When that broke, he used his bare hands. Liu Wei had switched from his sniper rifle to a shorter weapon. He moved through the fighting like a dancer, his poetry-reading mind somehow calculating exactly where enemies would be and where to aim his shots. Dr. Vasquez ran between wounded soldiers under heavy fire, dragging them to safety and treating their injuries. She saved the life of a hegemony soldier who had been wounded, even though his comrades were trying to kill her. "Why?" Kethvar shouted over the noise of battle. "Why save an enemy?" "Because I'm a doctor," she shouted back. "I save lives. That's what I do." Private Tanaka held her communication post until the very end, sending updates and coordinating the last defensive efforts. When enemy soldiers finally broke through to her position, she smiled and activated a grenade that killed her attackers along with herself. As the sun rose on the third day, only a few dozen human soldiers were still alive. They had been pushed back to the entrance of the civilian shelters. Thousands of enemy bodies lay scattered across the battlefield, but there were still too many left. Commander Chen, wounded and exhausted, gathered her surviving soldiers. Her artificial eye had been damaged and sparks came from the broken electronics. "This is it," she said simply. "Last stand. Make it count." The humans formed a final circle around the shelter entrance. They had almost no ammunition left and most of their weapons were damaged or destroyed. But they stood ready to fight with whatever they had. Kethvar stood with them, holding his weapon with shaking hands. He had watched these humans for days, seen them fight and die and never give up. Now he understood something that his analytical mind had never grasped before. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was being afraid and fighting anyway. Love was not just an emotion. Love was being willing to die for people you might never see again. As the final enemy assault began, Kethvar realized that he was no longer just an observer. He was part of something larger than himself, something that his people had forgotten in their pursuit of logic and efficiency. He was part of a family that chose to stand together, no matter what the cost. The battle raged around the shelter entrance as the last human defenders made their final stand. And in that moment, Kethvar understood why he would live with regret for the rest of his life. Not because he had witnessed human savagery, but because he had witnessed human nobility. And his own people had lost that nobility long ago. The final battle seemed to last forever, but Kethvar later learned it was only 30 minutes. 30 minutes that changed everything he believed about courage, sacrifice, and what it meant to be truly alive. Commander Chen fell when a piece of exploding metal tore through her chest. As she lay dying, she handed her weapon to Kethvar. "Keep them safe," she whispered, looking toward the shelter entrance behind them. Tank was the last human soldier standing. His massive frame was covered in wounds, but he stood in front of the shelter door like an unmoving mountain. Enemy soldiers swarmed around him, but he fought them off with pieces of broken equipment in his bare hands. When Tank finally fell, Kethvar found himself alone, facing a dozen enemy soldiers. His weapon was empty and his hands were shaking. He expected to die, and was surprised to discover that he was not afraid. If death was the price of standing with these humans, he would pay it willingly. But just as the enemy soldiers raised their weapons to kill him, new explosions shook the battlefield. Different explosions. The sound of ship engines filled the air, and energy beams began striking the hegemony forces. Galactic Council ships had arrived. The battle turned completely around in minutes. The hegemony forces, exhausted from 3 days of fighting and having lost most of their numbers, broke and ran for their ships. Council fighters chased them across the sky, destroying most of the enemy vessels before they could escape. Kethvar sat among the bodies of the human defenders, holding Commander Chen's weapon and trying to understand what had happened to him. When Council soldiers found him, he could barely speak. The rescue forces were amazed by what they found. Of the 3,000 human soldiers who had defended Haven's Edge, fewer than 50 had survived. But they had killed over 40,000 enemy troops and destroyed most of the hegemony attack fleet. More importantly, all 40,000 civilians in the underground shelters were alive and unharmed. Dr. Vasquez was among the survivors, badly wounded but still trying to treat injured soldiers. When Council medics tried to take her to a hospital ship, she refused to leave until every wounded person had been cared for. "Human patients first," she insisted. "Then enemy wounded. Everyone gets treated." Liu Wei had survived by hiding in a collapsed building, using his sniper skills to pick off enemy soldiers throughout the final battle. When they found him, he was writing poetry about his fallen comrades. Private Tanaka was dead, but her communication equipment was still working. Her final message had reached Council forces and guided them to Haven's Edge. Even in death, she had helped save the people she died protecting. Tank was alive but unconscious, his body broken but his spirit undefeated. When he finally woke up weeks later, his first words were to ask if the civilians were safe. The Galactic Council conducted a full investigation of the battle. Military experts studied the defensive tactics, the casualty ratios, and the strategic decisions. Their conclusions shocked the entire galaxy. A small force of humans had not just delayed a much larger enemy army. They had effectively destroyed it. The Hegemony Coalition had lost an entire attack fleet and their reputation for invincibility. But the numbers and tactics were not what amazed the investigators most. It was the behavior they could not understand. Humans who chose to die rather than abandon their posts. Soldiers who shared their last ammunition with comrades. Medical personnel who risked their lives to save enemies. Kethvar was called to testify before the full Galactic Council. He stood in the same great hall where he had received his orders, but everything had changed. He had changed. Analyst Zaltharan, High Commander Veltar said, "Please give us your assessment of human military capabilities." Kethvar looked around the hall at the assembled representatives of dozens of alien species. They wanted facts and numbers and tactical analysis, but how could he explain what he had really learned? "Humans," he began slowly, "are not superior fighters because of their technology or training. They are superior because they fight for each other. The council members made notes and nodded. They thought they understood. Their military strength, Kethvar continued, comes from their willingness to sacrifice individual lives for the group. This makes them extremely difficult to defeat because they will never surrender as long as they are protecting something they love. More notes, more nodding, but Kethvar knew they still did not understand. However, he said, and his voice grew stronger, any species that threatens human civilians or attacks human colonies will face resistance that defies all military mathematics. Humans do not calculate odds when they are defending their families. They simply fight until they win or until they are all dead. The hall was very quiet now. My recommendation, Kethvar said, is that the Council should never again question human commitment to our alliance. And we should never, ever consider humans to be a threat to galactic peace. They are the most peaceful people I have ever met. But they are also the most dangerous when their peace is threatened. High Commander Veltar asked the question everyone was thinking. And what about their emotional decision-making? Their inefficient command structure? Their disregard for logical tactical doctrine? Kethvar thought about Commander Chen handing him her weapon as she died. About tank fighting barehanded against impossible odds. About Dr. Vasquez treating enemy wounded while under fire. Their emotions, he said finally, are not weaknesses. They are weapons. Their love for each other makes them fight harder than any logical soldier ever could. Their anger at injustice makes them continue fighting, when logic says they should surrender. Their compassion for others makes them willing to die for people they have never met. He paused and looked directly at his superior. We Zelanians pride ourselves on our logical thinking, he said, but logic told those humans they could not win. Logic told them to surrender or retreat. Logic told them to save themselves, and, the High Commander prompted. And they chose to ignore logic, Kethvar said. They chose to fight anyway. And they won. The council session ended with a vote to offer full military alliance with humanity. The vote was unanimous, but for Kethvar, the real conclusion came later, when he visited the memorial wall that had been built on Haven's Edge. The names of all the human defenders were carved into black stone, with their pictures and short descriptions of their lives. He found Commander Chen's picture. Below it were the words, "She fought not because she hated what was in front of her, but because she loved what was behind her." Tank's memorial read, "He stood guard over innocence and never stepped aside," and Dr. Vasquez, "She healed enemies and friends with equal compassion." Liu Wei, "He found beauty in the darkest places." Private Tanaka, "She made sure the story would be told." As Kethvar read each name, he felt the weight of what he had witnessed. These humans had shown him something his people had lost in their pursuit of perfect logic. They had shown him what it meant to truly live. The regret he carried was not shame for the humans he had watched die. It was sadness for his own people, who had become so focused on thinking correctly that they had forgotten how to feel deeply. Years later, Kethvar served as the primary liaison between the Galactic Council and human military forces. He helped other species understand human tactics and psychology, but more importantly, he helped them understand human heart. He never married or had children of his own. Instead, he adopted 3 human orphans from Haven's Edge, children whose parents had died in the siege. He raised them with stories about courage and sacrifice and the importance of standing up for others. When other Zelanians asked why he had changed so much, why he showed emotions that their people considered primitive, he would tell them about a human doctor who treated enemy wounded under fire, about a sniper who wrote poetry between battles, about a commander who died handing her weapon to an alien observer she barely knew. "I learned," he would say, "that being logical is not the same as being right, and being civilized is not the same as being good." The Hegemony Coalition never again attacked a human world. They had learned that humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were something new in the galaxy, something that would fight to the death for principles instead of territory. Other species began to study human culture and military philosophy. Some tried to copy human tactics, but they could not copy the human heart, the willingness to die for strangers, the refusal to abandon hope even when hope seemed impossible. Kethvar lived with his regret, but it was a beautiful regret. It was the price of witnessing true heroism. It was the cost of learning that some things are more important than survival. And late at night, when he looked up at the stars, he would think about the humans he had known and loved and lost. He would remember their laughter, their courage, and their incredible ability to find light in the darkest places. He would remember that he had been privileged to stand with them, even if only for a few days. And he would know that whatever else happened in his long life, he had seen the very best that any species could offer. He had seen humans in battle, and it had made him more than he ever thought he could be.